let's bring in Alan Eyre. He's a distinguished diplomatic fellow at the Middle East Institute and a former senior diplomat on the US negotiating team for the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. And Alan, I just want to start by putting that question that Scott Bessent couldn't answer in that press conference to you. How long do you think this war, this standoff with Iran can realistically go on for?
That's the million-dollar question, Frankie. My sense is it's going to take a long, long time for this to work, even if it does work. I was in the State Department in the first Trump administration during the maximum pressure campaign, and that took, just for the limited success it had, months and months and months of serious and sustained diplomacy by the State Department, trying to talk other countries into decreasing their oil imports. State Department right now is broken in the water. It's really functionally inert. So I don't think that this administration has the time or the energy to whip up an effective multilateral sanctions regime that they're saying they're going to bring about. In addition, even if it begins to be effective, Iran has a vote in this process, and they'll just escalate against possibly Gulf energy targets to get the U.S. to lift the sanctions and lift the blockade. So I don't see this as a promising strategy.
Well, from Washington's perspective, they don't want this just to be Washington putting on these sanctions. It's calling on its allies and China to stop doing business with Tehran. Many of these countries already declined to take part in the war. South Korea, for example, want to mention. Is there a sense that the U.S. is now trying to shift the burden to other countries after it's failed to achieve its objectives?
Exactly right. I mean, the Trump administration has taken a motto of America first and transformed it into America alone. It didn't try to whip up multilateral support with traditional U.S. allies before this war. It launched it unilaterally. And now, 6 months later, the U.S. administration is saying, hey, please help. I think it's a little late in the day for that, and I don't think we can effectively mount the sort of sustained economic pressure on Iran, who has been undergoing economic pressure for decades from the United States. So again, I don't think you can get there from here with a strategy.
And China, let's talk China, because the US has called on China to help too. It buys more than 80% of Iranian shipped oil. It's also one of the largest export markets for the US. Xi Jinping is due to visit the White House next month. How far do you think Trump can push this before we see this conflict escalating into a much wider economic confrontation with Beijing, for example?
Yeah, that's, again, as you put it, Frankie, China is a key to this, and China has already shown it doesn't respond favorably to U.S. threats. It responds in kind. And given that there is this very important summit coming up, given that the bilateral relationship between China and the United States is so fraught already, I don't see President Trump sacrificing other key issues like, for example, rare earth minerals, just to advance his Iran policy. So I think the threat against China that Secretary Bessent and others are making is an empty one.
You mentioned there China doesn't succumb to threats. Nor does Iran, by the looks of it. You know, you've negotiated with Iran in the past. You were part of the team for the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which Iran did sign. What would you say the current administration is getting wrong when it comes to dealing with the leadership?
Well, I think the big fallacy they're making is that they think additional pressure will cause Iran to move closer to U.S. red lines, that if you put enough pressure on Iran, they'll capitulate. The opposite is the case. Iran takes as an operating assumption that the United States is seeking to topple the Islamic Republic. And so it thinks, and it feels this viscerally, that any compromise, any capitulation in the face of U.S. pressure won't lessen that pressure, it will only increase it. So the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the military entity running Iran right now, is not going to compromise regardless of how much economic pain the U.S. can inflict on the Iranian people.
So if you were part of the negotiating team, what would you say, what would you be advising is the way forward? Would you be looking to go back to the MOU that some people have said is dead in the water, going back to diplomacy, or is it a case of escalation in military strikes and military action?
Well, military strikes aren't going to cut the mustard, Frankie. It's not going to get Iran to capitulate. It could be too late for diplomacy. Certainly, the Islamic Republic right now still sees the MOU, the Islamabad MOU, as the framework for negotiations with the United States. What they're messaging now is that the U.S. broke the framework and they want the U.S. to live up to it. So they're still seeing the framework as a possibility. But this late in the game, especially with a U.S. administration that really hasn't shown either the competence or the inclination to engage in serious and sustained diplomacy, I have real doubts as to whether even diplomacy can get us out of this mess.
OK, well, we'll be watching it closely. Alan Eyre, Distinguished Diplomatic Fellow at the Middle East Institute and former senior diplomat on the US negotiating team for that Iran nuclear deal. Thank you for talking to us here on Al Jazeera.
Thank you, Frankie.